to the September 12th meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. We have a roll call, please.
For microphone, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the September 12th meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have a roll call, please?
Authority members Agajanian.
Present.
Garpetian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Karazian.
Here.
Sinanian. Chair Devine.
Here. Next item, please.
The agenda for the September 12, 2017 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Friday, September 8, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Next item is oral communications. No cards were submitted for this portion. Following that, on the business agenda at 6A is Director of Community Services and Parks regarding Glendale Homeless Continuum of Care COC funding application for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD under 2017 COC program completion. 6A1 is a motion to approve the 2017 Homeless COC program priorities, authorizing city manager, executive director, or his designee to submit an application to HUD on behalf of the Glendale Homeless COC under its 2017 COC program completion, and authorizing the city manager, executive director to execute all relevant documents with HUD and subrecipient service providers related to the 28-19 COC programs.
Thank you. Before we get to that, do we need to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
There were no minutes on this agenda.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, I just want to say up front, as I understand this, we are looking at two items. One is for federal funding and one is for state funding.
Yes. One's for the NOFA and one's for the state ESG. I'll have Ms. Yvette Samuelian, our manager overseeing homeless programs. She'll give the two presentations. But for an introduction, good afternoon, members of the Housing Authority. The Glendale COC has been implementing programs since 1993. This past year, the COC successfully reduced the homeless count from 240 persons down to 168 in 2017. And Essentia serves as the lead agency for the Glendale COC. They serve over 1,500 clients per year. On July 11th, staff updated you on the Measure H planning and the Measure H process. And we did bring to the authority some issues and concerns that we have in terms of direct funding and direct allocations. Currently, the amount of direct funding offered, which is $273,000, is too small for Glendale COC. That's for 5 strategies. One being homeless prevention, the other being partner with the city to expand rapid rehousing, countywide outreach system, strengthen the coordinated entry system, and enhance the emergency shelter program. Another concern that we have is the administration costs. The administration dollars is only 16% of the amount funded. We would need more in administration dollars to run the Measure H program. And the funding is restricted to county priorities and not the Glendale needs. And last, the allocation is based on the homeless count of 2017, which is 168. And from staff's perspective, it should be based on the amount of homeless served per year through our lead agency, Essentia. The city should be determining what strategies and the amount of funding. There's not enough funding for administration. With that being said, we're having difficulty with the county CEO office in securing additional funding. So we would like to reach out to the supervisor's office, Catherine Barger, Supervisor Solis, to request more funding for Measure H. And with that being said, we would also like the county to explore giving us funding not only for Glendale, even though the continuum of care is based in Glendale, we also outreach to Northeast LA, the Burbank area, more regionally. We have a lot of LA clients, the population LA, coming into Glendale and receiving services. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. With that being said, after all the questions, I will invite Ms. Samuelian to present the COC NOFA and the state ESG.
Okay, Councilmember Alajajan.
Yes. You said the homeless count was 240 and successfully we reduced it to 168. Do we register these people? How you know successfully you guys reduce the homeless count? I thought they come and go as they want.
The homeless count happens one night. I believe it's a 2-hour shift or 4-hour shift during the day and 4-hour shift during the night. And it's done the last week in January. Homeless services staff and volunteers in the city go out and interview homeless clients that are out on the streets.
Okay.
Any other
All right,
questions?
thank you.
Yes,
Deputy Mayor?
the page one, the $2.3 million
Yes.
plus 80 plus 145. This money goes to who?
The 2.3 million, they go to our nonprofits, one being Essentia. Some money goes to Family Promise of the Verdugos. Some goes to the city for admin costs, our rapid rehousing program, and the state ESG program, federal ESG program.
And for the future, if we get a breakdown of that, I think that would be helpful because
Sure.
when it says 16% is the administration
The presentation is for the NOFA. The 16% admin is for Measure H. That's totally different.
cost? Okay, so because it was,
Yeah, that's for.
mentioned on this, so-
Yes, that's
Okay.
for the NOFA presentation. The 80,000 in CDBG money, those are monies that were allocated by the CDBG Advisory Committee and City Council to the nonprofits such as Catholic Charities, the Loaf and Fishes Program, Salvation Army, and YWCA.
Right. So if, yeah, I would like to, for future meetings, I would like to have a breakdown of that 2.3 million and see
Sure.
who gets what and how do they spend it out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Najarian?
Thank you. Question for the city attorney. I'm on the advisory board to the Family Promise of the Verdugos. Does that conflict me out from allocating money to them in this action?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the Housing Authority, that particular regulation does apply for the members, for example, of CDBG. There's no rule that applies to the council members. So you are okay participating if you choose to.
Okay. How about if one of the, and thank you for the list of officers. If I have received a campaign contribution from someone listed in this report, am I precluded from giving them money?
Within the previous 12 months?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, you would be.
Do I have to disclose who that is, or just
You would have to
indicate
disclose-
that there is a?
No, well, you would have to disclose who it is unless you and recuse yourself from participating in the item, or you can disclose who gave you the donation, and the council can take up that particular item first, the motion on that particular provider, and then you can come back in for the rest of the discussion.
One more question. If one of the individuals here is a source of income to me in my practice as an attorney, does that create a financial interest for which I must recuse myself?
If they have been a source of income to you of over $500 in the last 12 months, then yes, they would be a source of income to you, and you'd be precluded from participating in the decision as to that particular provider.
Okay, well, I better go then, because, and these are a lot of community members in this. I know some of us have businesses that, cater to the community. I have a conflict with Nick Lamb from Pacific BMW, with Guillaume Lemoine, and as I said, there's the Family Promise of the Verdugos, which you said is not a hard conflict.
Correct.
So what do I do, just step out then, or can we parcel these out?
Well, that'll be up to the council, but yeah, my recommendation would be
Unless
to.
there's a rule of necessity coming up, does anyone else have any conflicts?
I don't know. We'll ask
with any of these
to see if any council members. But what I would recommend is just so we're talking about Essentia, Mr. Najarian, and
Guillaume Lemoine from the Red Cross, I believe.
okay.
believe he's a Red Cross.
Yeah.
He was on the second item.
Oh, second item, okay. So we'll take up the first item, and with respect to Sensia, the council can act with respect to them, and we'll basically break up the motions in that regard, and you can come back and participate in the rest of the item.
Well,
Are we talking about 6A?
For now, we're talking
Okay.
about 6A, yes.
Great, okay. Mr. Garpetian? Mayor?
What if we have a commissioner that we appointed, like Sean Sahak and I appointed him to Arts and Culture
Right,
Commission?
no,
That doesn't,
there's no conflict there.
there's no conflict.
No, I
Just ask. I think we all should get off these boards and commissions. I'm telling you, I resigned from every board that I was on when I.
And just so you know, actually, since it came up, we are doing some cleanup on the campaign finance ordinance, and one of the things we were looking at is we include nonprofits because of the source of it. What triggered the campaign finance ordinance involved a nonprofit. So, but what we are looking at is whether nonprofits for social service type, like this particular item, maybe we don't include those within the campaign finance because it was not intended to be swept within the ambit of this ordinance, but it has been. So we are actually looking at that. Actually, I just mentioned it to the attorney today that's working on it. So.
Thank you, because I am also on that advisory board. Okay. I have a question for Own.
I'm sorry, real quick. Are there any more questions
Jamie?
on the conflict issues so that Mr. Najarian can step out and then we
Okay.
can discuss how to participate?
If I don't have conflict with the people here, but it has been mentioned like a business. If I did business with one of these companies,
So again, same thing. If any of these businesses were a source of income to you in the past 12 months of $500 or more, and none of the exceptions apply, then you would have a conflict and you wouldn't be able to participate. My suggestion would be to, unless we can identify, we either put this matter over, or you just, if you do have a conflict, that you step out and recuse yourself from consideration of the item. Because I as we sit here now, I'm not going to have an opportunity to determine whether or not one of the exceptions applies.
Pacific BMW, I had business, but Nick Lamb has nothing to do with BMW. He's doing some other stuff with owner of the BMW. This is not correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's his reporting. So I would encourage, if that was a source of income for you to.
He's like vice president or something.
But for something else.
They do other things too.
Yeah.
They have other.
Yeah, obviously Nick has other businesses,
Okay.
and so does.
So what I do? I leave?
Yeah, my recommendation would be for both of you
But
to
I have-
step
So then we
outside.
don't have a
Well,
quorum.
there goes our quorum.
So
And
we
you
don't
got
have
to
a
rule of
quorum.
necessity.
Well, we have, yeah.
We have a quorum.
No,
Three of us?
because there's the 7 members on the housing.
Seven
Yeah, we
members.
have 4.
Onig, you want to come up here for this?
No, but I had question. I want to ask my question, then I can leave.
Well, again,
Is
if
that
you have-
possible?
The rules, the conflict rules are such that when you have a conflict, you can't participate, you can't ask questions, you can't attempt to.
Point of clarification. Not that I'm against or in favor, but
If you have a conflict, you cannot
Yeah.
ask
participate.
question.
No, that's what he just said.
So what we do now? We leave?
Well, and
Are we
if you would
leaving?
just 1 second. Actually, and remember, the source of income has to be the organization that's getting the particular contract here. So, and maybe I misspoke a little bit on the actual conflict, financial conflict of interest. It's only if Essentia was the one, or any of these providers are actually a source of income to you. I think the board members is okay. And again, I do apologize. I'm sort of providing advice here on the fly because I've just learned about this. So we have a couple of options. We can either put the matter over so I can fully research it, or because the campaign one is definitely a conflict, and Mr. Najarian would have to step out. And then on the conflict of interest for source of income, if as long as none of these nonprofits are a source of income to you, then I believe you can participate.
Can we postpone this?
Let me ask Onig, is there a deadline for application?
Our deadline to submit is September 28th, but Mr. Lam is emeritus. He's not on the board as of June 30th. So if Mr. Lam is
He's not on the board.
he's not on the board. He's an emeritus.
He didn't give.
That was mine.
That was your,
That was mine.
as to Essentia. Okay. But let me ask, so he is not on the board?
No.
He's emeritus position.
What does that mean? If I can get you.
He's not a voting board member.
Yeah, just quickly.
Natalie Kimura with Essentia. Nick Lamb is no longer a voting board member. He has an emeritus status, but that's not a voting member.
Does he participate in the meetings?
No.
Okay. Well, there's no, the campaign ordinance, members of council, just references the board of directors. And so, my thought is it was intended for those that have sway or influence or voting authority on that ordinance. So my sense is that the council can participate, council members can participate. That's the only board member who's participating.
So that answers my question, so I'm in on 6A.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
and then Mr. Alajanian
Okay.
is also in on 6A?
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
I have a question.
as do I, okay.
So,
Belazian?
Mr. Bulanikan, you did mention that the money were awarded or just allocated by the homeless count, right?
Yes.
And all those 21 years, $42 million were awarded based on the business, homeless count?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
All those years, for 21 years, starting 1996, $42 million was awarded to Glendale, right?
No, that was the Measure H, the new funding coming in from the tax revenue, is based on the homeless count. The last 21 years, that's money that we've been receiving through HUD. There's multiple projects, Shelter Plus Care, Coordinated Entry System, Rapid Rehousing, and so on.
Okay, thank you. And how about the Family Promise? Is it new business, new entity, or no?
Family Promise is new. They're about 2 years. They've been operating for about 2 years in Glendale, Burbank, Glendale area.
Thank you.
And I have a question. You mentioned that our count is 168, Essensia's is different, and you want the amount that we receive based on Essensia's count? What is the difference in that?
The 168 was the homeless count. The 1,500 per year is the number of people that enter through Essentia and ask for services.
Okay, so that's a much larger number.
That's a much larger. So we're asking for the 1,500 count because that's the homeless population. That's the homeless. That's how many homeless clients Essentia works with. Over 1,500.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So I'll invite Ms. Samuelian to present the COC NOFA presentation. Thank you.
I hope I can.
Good afternoon, Chair, Divine, members of the Housing Authority, City staff. Yvette Samuelian, Community Services Manager for the City of Glendale. Mr. Bulanikan discussed the Measure H, which is a different component of the homeless services. That's something new. Before you today is the 2017 annual homeless application that the City Parks Department is in charge of submitting to the federal government on an annual basis. And this is a national competition that the Continuum of Care is responsible for. So I apologize.
You want to go to the other presentation?
No, this is it. Excuse me. Right.
Just click it as you would a normal mouse.
It's not. It's
No.
not. No. All right. So I can continue the presentation and we can work out the logistics of it. Staff is here before you to respectfully recommend the Housing Authority to approve the funding application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The funding sources, thank you. The funding sources to implement the Glendale Continuum of Care is from the federal government, Housing Urban Development. The City of Glendale has been a recipient since 1996 to oversee the homeless Continuum of Care. And the awardees are subcontracted to our nonprofit organization. The Continuum of Care receives and competes annually about $2.3 million. This is the specific funding application related to the $2.3 million today we're asking for Housing Authority to approve. The Community Development Block Grant funding, which is an entitlement funding, supports the Continuum of Care about $80,000. It supports some of the homeless services agencies within various programming. City also is an entitlement city and receives Emergency Solutions Grant, and that serves and provides services for emergency shelter programming, and that's annually about $145,000. The Continuum of Care priorities and the components, part of this application includes permanent supportive housing and supportive services for our chronically homeless individuals and families experiencing homelessness. Rapid rehousing program, which is a short-term rental assistance program that is administered through the City of Glendale. Street outreach, coordinated entry, which Essentia, part of Glendale Continuum of Care, and SPA 2 for individuals is our lead coordinated entry to the system for homeless services. The fourth component is joint transitional housing and permanent housing. Homeless prevention and emergency shelter programming is eligible. However, that's addressed part of the state and city ESG application, which I will cover in shortly. One of the most overarching mandate for HUD in terms of the Continuum of Care funding is housing first. And what that means is that staff, along with all the service providers, need to work with unsheltered populations who are homeless on the streets, working with them aggressively and intensively to put them in housing first, and then begin providing all the case management services that includes to be able to sustain their housing, life skills, paying their rent, accessing mental health services, substance abuse, etc. With regards to the Continuum of Care committee and the board, one of the requirements is for the Continuum of Care to have board members comprised of nonprofits and the different subpopulation, including from law enforcement, congregations, homeless alumni, and advocates. Our current board members are elected by the committee, and we have today here with us Chair Lieutenant Gilkerson here if there's any questions regarding the process or the Continuum of Care. I also have Bruce Nelson, Diana Hale from School District, Gary Brooks, a former alumni who is part of our Continuum of Care Continuum of Care programming, Melissa Yunesian from Vertigo Job Center, and Gabrielle Waring from Women's Services Center in downtown LA. The main responsibilities of the board is to provide strategic planning for the Continuum of Care and how to run the homeless programs, to identify gaps in our community and develop programming, in addition to, on an annual basis, to review the funding applications issued by the City of Glendale. Part of this funding, rank and tier the project, and the submission of the recommendation to Housing Authority for submission to HUD for the funding on an annual basis. Currently, our 2017 application total availability is about $2.5 million. Again, this supports various Continuum of Care programming. The Housing Authority is the lead applicant in terms of our collaborative application. The application is based on tiering the projects in two sections, Tier 1 and Tier 2, and I will get into the details of that particular process. In terms of Tier 1 projects, these are all high-performing projects that must be ranked in Tier 1 to guarantee funding, and Tier 2 projects are either low-priority projects or selected based on funding availability. And in terms of scoring on the funding applications, board members and staff reviewed the applications to make sure that the organizations are performing. They're addressing veteran status, youth and family, and implementing housing first models. The Continuum of Care funding Tier 1 and Tier 2, on an annual basis, HUD directs staff and board of directors to review the application in totality. And this year, HUD required that 94% of our $2.5 million be allocated in Tier 1, which comprises of $2.1 million. And I will, in the next slide, I will go into the details of the specific Mr. Garabetian had asked about itemizing the $2.3 million. That's on page 8 of our council report. But in terms of annual renewal demand, HUD will only fund about $2.1 million if there's not enough funding to go around to allocate for the continuums. And the rest of the funding in terms of projects, and again, I'll go into the details on the next slide, we'll have to figure out a way to identify the gap and or move participants out of those programming. Currently, there are 12 projects that are available and eligible for renewal funding. Part of the application. So this specific slide talks about what our total application looks like. We will be submitting an application on or before September 27th for $2.5 million. 2.3 is our annual renewal demand. What that means is currently all of our nonprofit organizations running the current programs, our demand to run these programs is $2.3 million. However, only $2.1 million is ranked in Tier 1, which means of the 2.1 is guaranteed for funding, unless, and in the event that our application and our continuum is successful enough to receive the full funding. We will be submitting one new permanent housing bonus project, which is an eligibility on an annual basis. It's $138,000. Basically, this serves maybe 3 chronic homeless individuals and provides housing vouchers. And then a COC planning funding for $69,000. And the permanent housing and the COC planning are not renewable funding. They're one-time, again, assuming our continuum of care is successful in operating homeless programming. So with the specifics of the NOFA, we are mandated to issue an RFP, which we did that back in July. We received applications were reviewed, and board met on August 28 to rank the projects and the priorities. The specifics of the itemized allocation for the 2017 application is included on this chart, and also it's part of our council report. The projects that are ranked the top priorities went to the specific projects that are over the capacity of its HUD-approved units and vouchers. And the lowest priorities that are ranked in Tier 2, specifically the Family Promise Rapid Rehousing Program. Currently, there's no clients in that housing project, and the city was informed that the Family Promise is not going to be able to apply for the renewal funding for this project for fiscal year 18-19. Therefore, the city took over the sponsorship of this program, and because there's no current applicants or participants in this housing project, the board has made a recommendation to put this project in Tier 2, which means if the funding is lost, there's no current participants in the program, but our goal is to make sure that we retain the funding in our continuum of care. So these are the itemized allocations for each of the specific projects. Most of the top priorities are all permanent supportive housing projects. We have over 150 units of permanent housing that Ascensia provides the case management, and they leverage that services. There's no funding that goes to Ascensia for that case management services. In terms of fiscal impact, the application, as I discussed, is about $2.5 million. The total administrative dollars allocated under the continuum of care funding is 7%, and we typically share 3.5, split 3.5 between our subrecipients and the city. That's about $150,000 to run to $2.5 million in terms of funding for administration. And the challenge has been with homeless programs that there's not enough administrative dollars allocated to run these programs. As a result, we also look at other funding sources to supplement, leverage, and match. And so one of the programs that support the administrative cost is our homeless management project funding, and then most recently some general funds has been allocated to support the homeless programs, which we really appreciate. This gentleman has been homeless in our community for about 20 years. He was the first participant I had encountered with, and I'm happy to announce that he has been in housing for 3 months and is successfully maintaining his housing. The challenge is, after 20 years that he's in housing, the second challenge is to make sure that case management services is provided, that he does retain his housing. So at this moment, staff is asking respectfully for the Housing Authority to allow and approve the 2017 Continuum of Care project priorities and authorize city manager or the executive director and or his designee to submit our funding application to the federal government on or before September 28th for $2.5 million. And if there's any specific questions about the presentation or the report on this aspect, I will be happy to answer.
I have a speaker. Would you rather, can I ask, should we have the speaker first and then questions? Is that okay? Okay. Natalie Kimura, please, from Ascensia.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Yvette and the staff for doing such great work because they had a 2-week window to get the application out and assemble it, and it's a very tedious process. I did want to go back to the Measure H question because the continuum of care funding that you're about to, we hope, approve is now in a very particular moment. The continuum of care of Glendale has always been sort of treated as within the city as its premier programs for homeless services, but the reality is that over 80% of the people that use our services come from outside the city of Glendale. And I brought a cumulative heat map, and I don't know how well you can see this, that shows where people are coming from outside of Glendale to us for help. This has been going on for 20 years. Well, we've been measuring for 10. And so the point being that Los Angeles has really benefited from the Glendale continuum of care. So the proposal under Measure H from the county to give 0.3% of funding to you based on the homeless count is really disingenuous. Not only would they say that you have to spend 0.3%, you would also be required to still continue to serve the rest of the service planning area 2 boundary projects in the service planning area 2 in that coordinated entry system. So they're wanting it both ways. We took another look at this and said, look, we're serving northeast Los Angeles down to the Los Angeles River, including Burbank. That area is more like 7,000 people. It's closer to 13% of the homeless population of the county. It's a matter of tens of millions of dollars difference in what we're talking about in this region. So we're hoping that the City Council can be an advocate on our behalf, that can explain this to the county so we can do a better job to be more effective in the planning for our region. If you look at the encampments in northeast Los Angeles, they're very intense. There is it's almost a no man's land. There's a small grassroots organization in northeast Los Angeles, and then us. But the funding isn't allocated in a way that's going to get us services in those communities, and that's affecting the service delivery here in Glendale. We hope that you can argue successfully for better funding for your community and that you could be the leader in planning that we so desperately need for this region, pushing back on the directives that have been coming out of the LA Homeless Services Authority, the United Way, and Los Angeles County. I should also note that the United Way just did a planning grant that excluded Glendale, Pasadena, and Long Beach from planning. It was an RFP for multi-jurisdictional planning. Glendale can't be part of it. I'll be participating for Burbank, I hope, but it's outrageous that they would do this exclusion at a time when we really need to be working more collaboratively.
Was that
Because we have the continuum of care. And we get funding from the state.
Mm-hmm. But you don't. But you don't, and your revenue is going out to their, United Way money is different, but I think that the reality is if we're really talking about working more effectively, we need to stop doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Question?
Well, we raised this issue about a month ago because our understanding was that Glendale is 200,000, population is about 200,000. We pay our fair share of the Measure H taxes, and we want to get basically at least half of the taxes that we generate. And the answer was pretty much, and I spoke to one of the council members of Long Beach, and they're saying the same thing, that it's between Long Beach, Glendale, and Pasadena, I believe, because we have the continuum of care, and we receive some funding from the state, we're being excluded. And the amount of funds that's going to come from Measure H to Glendale is going to be very small because we have other fundings from the state. So this is something that I understand that we raised the same issue, and the answer was because we receive funding from state, we're getting, and our homeless count is less than, per capita is less than other cities. We're not getting our share of the Measure H money. So I think this just, we were kind of, not upset, but we were concerned about our fair share of the Measure H funding, and it's just not coming to us. So I think this is a way to maybe push back and try to get some more funding from the board.
Yeah, it's extremely disingenuous. The reason the homeless count went down is because we went from the El Nino year when we had the 130-bed shelter to no winter shelter. That significantly affected your homeless count numbers. And then to further diminish your allocation because you've been working to address, you successfully reduced homelessness is also disingenuous. HUD gives bonuses to jurisdictions that reduce homelessness. But the bottom line is that this community serves a much broader area. And if you're going to do this based on homeless count, then you need to count all the people in the area that we serve. And that's far and above the 0.3%.
Mr. Ochoa, who's representing Glendale on the board, on Measure H board?
At this point, it's Mr. Bulanikian and Ms. Samvelian. We have endeavored to this point to try to play through the rules, the rulemaking that is there for Measure H. And I think what you've heard from Onig and what you're hearing from Natalie is that now it's entering the political realm. And trying to do this administratively, we are not getting the consideration that we had hoped to get. That I think even I would say that based on the initial meetings that we had, that we were told not to worry, that you would get. It doesn't really appear that way. And so at this point, we were looking to the bully pulpit of the City Council, the Housing Authority Board, to reach out both to our county supervisors, as Natalie says, we cover a larger area than just Glendale, as well as partners across the river in LA.
I think, Natalie, you probably know that I went down to the Board of Supervisors on Supervisor Barger's behest and spoke on our concerns with this Measure H. And hopefully, and I think I would be willing to, I'll be at your convenience whenever you need me to speak about it for the city. I think all of the council and housing authority here would be willing to fight for this this cause, and I assure you that we're up for it. So
thank you.
I would tell you, ma'am, the United Way grant is kind of a watershed moment for us, being affirmatively excluded from that process. It tells you, it speaks volumes. And so at this point, yes, we're having to go that route.
And one last question. Why are we being excluded from there? Because we have the continuum of care. So if we shut it down tomorrow, we will be part of that United Way.
It's funny that you mention it that way. You characterize it that way. One thing that Onig and Natalie and I discussed this morning is, then if that is the position and the directive that LAHSA is going, that the county is going, then maybe we should just pull the plug and just fold it all back into LAHSA and allow then those folks to take over the entire burden. They would tell you, no, don't do that. We still want you to be engaged, but they want you to be engaged on the rules, under the rules in which they devise. And it's unfortunate. They're trying to have the cake and eat it too.
Right, because we're getting $2.3 million on this application, and because of that, we're losing tens of millions of dollars probably.
Of locally generated revenue, of which, as a powerhouse local economy as we are not seeing that fair share. Council, as you indicate, a few months ago was very strong, saying it's this double-edged sword. On the one hand, we don't necessarily want to be a beacon, an attractive nuisance. We'd have a shelter. All these folks come, and then there's spillover impacts that we deal with, such that we saw with the winter shelter. At the same time, we know that we have the folks that are here in Glendale who are homeless, and as Natalie points out, we have people that surround Glendale in the service area that know Glendale is safe, that know our police officers are empathetic, that they can get service through all of our different facilities and through Essentia. And so we have some of this innate dynamic no matter what. And if we're going to be in this business, then we have to have the funding source for it. And through Measure H, that funding source is available. However, LA City, I shouldn't say LA City, but the folks at LAHSA, their attitude is to have their cake and eat it too. They want to make those rules, develop the strategies, and tell you that you have to, one, do their strategies and do them the way that they determine, and do it to an extent without any kind of flexibility whatsoever for you and your local community. And that has just not proven effective for us, Pasadena or Long Beach.
And I think the other thing is that it seems like we get no respect for the terrific program and support system that we have for our homeless. The fact that our numbers have decreased from last year, and I think for that alone we should be given funds so that we can continue this type of program. I think the shocking thing for me was learning that Essentia has over 1,500 passing through, and yet our count is 168, and we are, rather punished, I guess, for that. So I think that we need to step up and fight for this funding. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll take questions from council and the authority on, start
Yes, I
with
have a question.
Janian.
Can you go back to the page before this? Okay. Over there it reads HUD allows a 7% allocation toward administrative costs and 3.5% for city staff and 3.5% to the COC, continuum of care. And then it says 25%. The money we get covers 25% of our cost. So that means, am I right? 7% of 2,500,000 will be 175,000. Is that what we get?
That's correct, yes.
And then 3.5% is 85,000,
Right.
let's say, or 87,500. Then we get 25%, means like 22,000. So we are short 5,000. And then it says that will cover by homeless management information system. What is homeless management information system? First, I want to know who are they? It's part of the city or not, since I don't know.
Housing Authority member Agajanian, the Homeless Management Information System is a renewal project it's a system that the City of Glendale is required to utilize for data collection and reporting on behalf of the continuum of care that our subrecipients use for our clients, and it's used to submit data to our Housing Urban Development, to HUD. The part of this annual application, $88,000, if you refer back to page 6 of the council report, $88,000 is allocated for the HMIS project. And so out of the $88,000, about $45,000 is paid for our vendor who provides the system to us, and we subcontract to our nonprofit agencies to utilize it, and about $40,000 of that is staff funding to administer all the reporting requirements mandated by the federal government for the continuum of care programming. So which means all of the 2,000 persons that are served throughout our continuum of care and 1,500 that are served through Essentia, every one of them are entered into our management systems. Services are provided, case management is included, demographic data, ethnicity information, where they came from in terms of homeless status, and all of that is aggregated. On an annual basis, we submit reports to our federal government demonstrating what our homeless participants are, the needs and the gaps, and what's served. So with regards to administrative dollars, the continuum of care funding has never given adequate administrative dollars to manage the programs. And at the moment, what we do is we utilize and leverage other sources, such as ESG funding, a little bit of CDBG funding. The nonprofits are able to leverage and apply for different types of foundation to support the administrative burden, which is the financial management, the invoicing, the monitoring, the compliance requirements that comes along with the federal funded programs.
So in short, when we administer these funds, so eventually the city pays for it, right?
Currently, part of the continuum of care funding for the first time, general funds have been providing some support with regards to homeless programming, and that's direct services to our landlords. In terms of administrative dollars directly supporting for the continuum of care, we only have one outreach person that's an hourly person that has just begun working with us beginning this May, and general funds are supported to fund that person on an hourly basis to help out with outreach and coordinate with Essentia and make sure all the unsheltered populations are quickly engaged in services. But mostly we're able to look at and leverage services, and with the continuum of care funding, it's not adequate to provide staff capacity to run these programs. So we're very thinly staffed, and we do our best with what we can with the available funds that are directed for administrative dollars.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments, questions?
I have a comment, but not question from her.
Go ahead.
Comment?
Sure.
To the net?
Question.
But
Let
she-
me ask my question.
But he has questions.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. You mentioned that staff report, that's the breakdown on page 6?
Yes.
Is that what it was? It was kind of, I couldn't read
Very
wasn't
hard.
legible on the breakdown portion. I'm sorry, that's why I asked the question. But slide 9 is the same thing, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you explain to me the CS reallocation 2015
Yes.
For 620,000?
So the coordinated entry system is a requirement of the federal government for all homeless programs, the continuum of care programs, to have and implement. The $620,000 that's allocated to this project specifically are the case managers on a day in, day out that work with our 2,000 homeless persons in the city of Glendale. This includes 2,000. We keep going back to the 168 homeless persons. That's any point in time. So last January in 2017, we completed our needs assessment. We had identified on that one night within the 4 hours, only 168 persons that were sleeping in our streets. That's just one point in time. During the year, throughout the continuum of care programs, including Essentia, we serve over 2,500 homeless persons. That includes families, individuals, etc. So the coordinated entry system, which is mandated by HUD, in order for us to apply for this funding, we need to make sure we have an entry to our continuum of care, which is Essentia. They're the entry for all of our homeless participants to go into, to complete an intake, an assessment, determine their eligibility for all the available programs, which are listed in part of this application or part of the project's part of this application. And then they're determined to what resources and services are provided. Part of this project includes case management staff. It includes mental health therapists, a very small portion of psychologists and psychiatrists, assistance for clients to move-in expenses, employment case manager to work with the employment participants who are employable to gain employment. We have other case managers that work with veterans-specific needs, substance abuse and chronic drug abuse. Counselors are part of this particular project. So it's the case management that provides services to the 2,500 persons that enter through Essentia on an annual basis.
That 620,000 goes to Essentia?
That's correct. A portion of that goes to Essentia. A portion of that funding is also the administrative dollars that's allocated, shared between Essentia and City of Glendale.
So basically, Essentia receives half of the funding that we have, but 1.1 between 194,000, 620,000, and 352,000. I see three different categories in here. So 1.550, almost 1.2 million goes to Essentia.
That's correct, sir. And the reason why is that actually Essentia has capacity to run the programs. And from the $2.5 million, I do want to mention that 25% of this grant is also required for match. And so Essentia is able to find the matching dollars to support this program. So while we are applying for $2.5 million, they have to raise another $1.5 million, if not more, to be able to sustain the existing programming with the homeless programs.
And that 1.5 that they raise is spent with Essentia as well? It's
requirement of the grant for every nonprofit to raise at least 25% of the awarded funds to be able to receive this money. And it's pretty challenging for nonprofits to have that capacity to handle homeless programs with all the matching requirements.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Comments?
Yes.
Mr. Jamie?
Not from a general comment,
Okay.
Not a question. When Measure H was offered, I was happy that eventually we are thinking about homeless people in Glendale and LA County. But now I'm looking back, there is a problem with this because businesses in Glendale, they are collecting $8 million more taxes than before due to this 1/4 cent, the tax which was raised in LA County. But now I see, of course, that will bring 80,000 more tax dollars to Glendale. But the problem is that we are getting nothing out of that $8 million tax dollars we are collecting for homeless people. Nothing is coming back from that $8 million that the businesses are collecting in Glendale. And I'm very surprised that, however, if I see Ms. Barger, the supervisor of LA County, I'm going to mention to him that we are paying $8 million more. In return, you're allocating nothing to this city. So I'm very upset. And I was one of the people who on my TV program, I advocated people to vote for this measure. And In a way, I'm happy some homeless people anywhere they get homes, hopefully, but we are getting nothing out of it.
And I just want to let Authority Member Alajanian know that when Ms. Somalian and I went down to the supervisors' meeting, that was one of the points that we made, was the fact that Glendale worked so hard to get this ballot measure passed, and now we're kind of on the short end of the stick. Any other comments? Okay, I would like to just thank Ms. Somalian and staff for getting this application. Thank you, Ms. Kamara, for letting us know. And I want to also thank Ms. Kamara for all the good work that she and her board do at Essentia when you hear the figures of how many homeless you are helping, supporting, and getting through your organization, it's a job well done. Do I have a motion for this item?
Are we moving 6A and B?
6A.
6A1?
I second it.
I haven't moved it yet. I moved the item, 6A1.
I second.
All right. A roll call, please.
Authority members Alajanian,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Parazian,
Yes.
Sinanian, Chair Devine.
Yes. Thank you.
6B
Next
is
item.
Director of Community Services and Parks regarding fiscal year 2017-18 submission of grant applications to the State of California under the Emergency Solution Grant Program. B1 is a motion to approve the 2017 State ESG Program funding recommendations by Glendale COC Board of Directors, authorizing the Executive Director or his designee to submit a state ESG funding application for $157,398 and execute all necessary agreements, certifications, and documents necessary to apply for, accept, and implement the funding. 2 is a resolution authorizing the Executive Director or his designee to execute the standard agreement and any subsequent amendments to modifications to it, as well as any other documents which are related to the program for the ESG grant award for the Housing Authority as the department may deem appropriate.
Just to leave.
We'll note that Ms. Parazian has to leave at this moment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Devine, members of the Housing Authority, Yvette Samvelian. This item is a new item before you. This is the first time City of Glendale will be applying for state emergency solutions funding grant through the NOFA application process. So back in June of 2017, the Department of Housing and Community Development announced their funding availability for the Notice of Funding Availability for state ESG funding. The total funding for state allocations is about $77.2 million. In terms of specifically for Glendale Continuum of Care, we are eligible to apply for funding for $157,000, part of the state ESG. The funds support Glendale Continuum of Care programs in terms of emergency solutions program. The ESG national objectives are very consistent and similar to the city ESG funding, which we receive on an annual basis, part of our entitlement, and that is to expand and improve emergency shelter program and facilities, support ongoing services that includes case management, weeknight services, overnight shelter case management staffing, rapid rehousing, homeless prevention, and again, all of these national objectives are consistent with the city ESG funding requirements and our objectives as part of city's ESG planning process. The City of Glendale followed the same planning process for the state as well as the city ESG program. The Housing Authority, again, is the lead applicant for the funding and will work with the subrecipients to subcontract out the funding recommendations. The funding applications were, an RFP was issued back in June, and applications were received by the nonprofit organizations. Our Continuum of Care board met and again made funding recommendations, and a 2-year ESG funding plan has been developed for the state ESG planning process. When the board met back in August, the recommendations for the specific state ESG funding includes an allocation to YWCA of Glendale, which is our domestic violence emergency shelter program that serves 10 women and their children fleeing from domestic violence. And the funding is to support essential services operations of the shelter programming. A portion of the funding is allocated for the HMIS project. Again, that's required by the program in order for all nonprofits to receive the funding must participate in the HMIS programming. A portion of the funding is recommended for street outreach, about $11,000, again, to support Ascensia and the CES coordination for outreach services. Rapid rehousing for persons experiencing homelessness, and this funding is directly for just rental subsidy to the landlords that provide subsidy on behalf of a homeless client who's able to sustain their rental subsidy after a short period of time. That's either 1, 2, or 3 months of subsidy. And then a portion of the funding is allocated to Ascensia's emergency housing program, again, which is a emergency shelter program in the city of Glendale that serves 40 homeless persons any given night. The total funding allocation request that the city would like to request for Housing Authority members to approve and submit the funding application to the state of California is $157,000. At this moment, staff would like to request and respectfully request the authority to approve the submission of the application to the state, which is due by September 17th. However, the state would like the application between today and tomorrow. And staff will come back to the authority with regards to the appropriation of the funds if and when the funding awards have been announced to the city of Glendale within a month or two. So this is a first-time funding, again, for the city. We do have experience running emergency shelter solutions program funds as we are an entitlement city since 1987, and this would be added in addition to serve our existing service providers. So if there's any questions on the state application, I would be happy to answer them right now.
Madam Chair, in the interest of time, if the application is either due today or tomorrow,
Yeah, that's
if my
correct.
colleagues have no questions, I will move 6B1 and 2.
I second.
All right, roll call, please.
Let the record reflect that I'm recused on this.
Yeah, just have the record reflect that Housing Authority member Najarian
Is recused.
is recused.
Do we have a quorum now?
We don't have a quorum, though.
That's what she shouldn't have left.
Yeah.
We don't have a quorum?
And
So you have
the
to come
application
back.
is due.
Rule of necessity.
Is a rule of necessity.
Can you abstain?
Can he abstain?
Vote and abstain. And abstent.
Quorum, rule of necessity.
You know what? You can't participate because this is not a financial conflict of interest, so you can't be here for the quorum and then just abstain on the vote.
Okay.
Roll call, please.
Council members Agajanian?
Yes.
Garpetian?
Yes.
Najarian?
Abstain.
Karazian? Sinanian? Chair Devine.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
Next item is authority or member or staff comments.
Any comments?
Madam
None?
Chair, may
Yes.
we make a quick comment by the housing staff related to some density bonus units? Mike, are you or Pam going to do that?
New business? Density?
Just staff comments, Madam Chair.
On density bonuses?
Yes, density bonus issues?
So, Mike Forney, Housing Project Manager. Good afternoon, Housing Authority. I just wanted to report that we did have an incident last week. A resident came to the housing staff, our counter, and it said that they had paid $5,000 for the guarantee to get into one of the units at Onyx. So staff has contacted Onyx and their management. They knew nothing about this. She was directed to go to the police department to speak to them about the incident. But we just wanted to make that aware to you that had happened. It has happened in the past. It will likely happen in the future. So we just want to make it very clear that there is absolutely no way that you can pay money to get a guaranteed affordable housing unit, whether it be in a density bonus housing project or in one of the city's affordable housing projects. That absolutely will not happen. It will never happen. It's never happened in the past. So we wanted to make that clear. And we're working on a public service announcement to that effect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Mr. Allerton.
Do you know if the person filed a complaint with the police department?
They were sent to the police department. I don't know if they filed a complaint or not. I mean, the person that did it was obviously committing fraud themselves by paying the $5,000 for a guaranteed affordable unit. So it's likely they did not, but I don't know the answer to that. I can follow up and respond to you.
And you say you're going to do some outreach,
Yes.
for residents so that they know this, maybe something on GTV6 and.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
It's very, very important that people know not to fall for these. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a second?
Yes.
We are adjourned at 4:07.